share your screen already? Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, so if you can say a couple of words so that we can make sure that everything is on YouTube too.
All right, so let's see if YouTube can hear me.
Yep, it works. Okay, cool. So I would say then we're ready.
So then we will basically unmute ourselves so that we don't have an echo, and you can take it from here. Thank you for joining, by the way.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm very glad to be talking here, and I wish I were there with you all in Wales. But here I am in Brussels. So I'm Hans, and I'm mostly a computer engineer. I also enjoy writing a lot, and I will present a project which is kind of a gift of the computer engineer in me to the writer in me. So let's see what it's about. So to give you guys some background so you understand why this project was made. Some recurring themes in my writing are the conflict of individual versus society and the conflict of centralization versus decentralization in all kinds of forms. And I have a belief that the way you present something is an inherent part of a creation. So you can't, in my view, just create something and then distance yourself from the way it is presented to the world. And then there is a bit of an issue there because standard publication channels, unfortunately, are mostly centralized. So this is both for classical publishing, where you need to find a publisher, but also for the more modern day ways of publishing, which could be publishing something on Facebook or on Twitter or any other internet service. And this would be very hypocritical to find such a way of presenting, of publishing work which is related to, for example, decentralization. So that's where Hyperpubee was born. It's my way of trying to find a model for publishing work in a decentralized fashion. And I'll first give a brief overview of the properties. What does Hyperpubee offer? And I'll give a demo, so it immediately becomes much more concrete. And then I'll go into some details about what is the technology behind it and what is the fun part of using Hyperpubee. So number one advantage is that publishing is free in the broad sense. I think most people by now have heard this 1,000 times. But if you publish something on a classic internet service, it seems free, but it's not, because you actually give them your work. They own it, it's on their servers, they can basically do what they want with it. And they can monetize it, and they do monetize it in their own way. For example, by putting advertisement next to it. So that's immediately leads to the second characteristic, which is that all works are wholly writer-owned. So the writer chooses what to publish when, and also when to change something. And then from the reader point of view, so this was a bit of a tricky aspect, which I will enter into later, but I think it should be possible for anyone to read any work published from any kind of browser. So no need to install special software, just make it as easy as it is to read a Facebook post, which by the way is super hard nowadays if you don't have Facebook, but that's an aside. And then the core part of the project is to create an application where you can publish your works, read other people's works, and interact with the ecosystem. And it's a local first application, so you can look through your library of already read works without being connected to the internet. And you can also write and publish your stuff locally first before sharing it with anyone else. And this is a characteristic that I quite like, and what it means to publish or to create something, and it is that the readers can help you host the work. So your work will stay available as long as at least one reader is hosting it, as long as at least one person is hosting it. And also, if it becomes popular, then more and more readers will help hosting it to actually solve a major issue of centralized services, which is if suddenly your website becomes popular, it is very likely to crash unless you took a lot of pretty expensive precautions on the infrastructure side of things. And then some more detailed characteristics which will become relevant later. First, all works are versioned, so whenever you make changes, you keep both the original version and the change. And this immediately leads to a very fun aspect of Hyperpubee, which is that you can reliably embed parts of other works. So you can, for example, use the second line of a poem in your own poem, and then this is where the versioning is important, because if something is not versioned, like in the normal internet, you use a link to a specific page, the content of this page might change over time, or it might even go offline entirely, so you can't reliably embed anything in a standard internet ecosystem. So now we'll do a brief demo of the Electron app, so you all get a more concrete idea of what this application is all about. So as you could tell by the slides, I'm not a design guru, but let's just focus on the functionality. I'll iterate over the design later. So let's say you want to create a work. I provide some examples here. So let's let's just do a little bit of prose. Have a look if everything looks okay. So this is just for illustrative purposes, and to me it looks okay. So let's create it. Let's create a work. Now the work has been created under this key. So this is your unique identifier for this work. If you share it with someone, they can access your publication, assuming it's being hosted. And so let's say now you're happy with it. You proofread, maybe made some changes, and you're ready to share it with the world. So this is where you press host, and now it's being shared through the decentralized network. So now actually anyone with this key can access your work. I'll just show it through the browser. Have a look. This is our just created work. I'll post it in the chat as well, so anyone who wants can have a look at what we created together. If I can find the chat. That's the basic flow of how this application works. But this I like experimenting with literature, and that's where Hyperpubee really shines. This embedding part is where I'm really having a lot of fun at creative level. So I'll show you what this means exactly. This is an example of a work where I play with embeddings. So you can see a visual indication that these are coming from somewhere else. So we'll look at the source later of a poem like this, and you'll see that it's actually defined in a way where it references another this hash. And it says, okay, it's the first line of your poem. So if now you become curious, well, what is the context of this piece of text, you can have a look, and then you see, okay, this comes from this work, and it's this particular line. You can have a look at other parts of the text as well. So you can basically see where something comes from, and as well, you can also see the context. And this is recursive. So that's where the fun really begins. If this poem had embeddings, you could also follow them to see their context. There is another example, so you can perfectly well embed parts from different works. So here we have an embedding from this piece of text. We also have embeddings from, from a poem. And this is a part of the project where I'm still iterating quite heavily. I still haven't figured out how to input embeddings. I'll show you how it's done now, and then you'll see why I haven't made bigger examples so far. So basically, we just specify a unique identifier of the content. And this is not doable. So I'm looking into a user interface where you could just select a part of the text and then right-click, create embedding. This is work in progress still. And a final note on those embeddings, you can also patch them. So you don't have to use them exactly as they are. You can also deterministically modify them. So here, for example, we use this piece of text, but instead of chains, we use another word. And this gives the opportunity to play with whatever you're embedding. You can make jokes or play with the context. So a lot of fun possibilities for creative people. Well, I'll continue now unless there are specific questions about this demo if something wasn't clear. I'll also leave room for questions at the end of the presentation. Feel free to interrupt.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, one question. I didn't completely understand the problem with embedding. What's exactly?
You mean the open issue I have with it, or what it does exactly?
I mean, how it works. So what's the issue? Yeah, exactly.
So how it works is, let's load an example. So this is the way I currently input something with embeddings. So I have my plain text here. Then here I define the source of the text I want to embed. So I manually wrote down the hash, and then it's the first line of the work. Then you see that it dynamically will look for this work, so this particular hash. It will load the text at location content 0, which in this case is published text and embedded in your own text. And you can choose to either embed a fixed version, so then you're certain the content will never change, or you can choose to embed the latest version, so then your content might change if the author of the original work makes changes to the original work. So that's what an embedding is. And the open issue is that I'm still looking for a clean way to input an embedding. Okay, if I'm writing a work, for example here, I don't want to type out this line. It's very, very cumbersome and very ugly. So I'm trying to think of a way to just do it with a user interface where I could select a piece of text, right-click it and say, make an embedding out of this. Does this answer the question?
Yeah, I think that answers it. So it's more like a user experience issue rather than a technical one. That's my understanding. Which is
exactly
important. I thought it was a technical issue, but okay, now I get it. Thank you.
No, so technically this is working, as you can see, because if you put and you load it, you might actually see that there is some loading time for these embeddings, because it needs to load the other work, then load this particular part of the text. But actually, it's more fun than this even, because But I'll explain this when I get to the tech stack. But it doesn't need to load the entire work. It will just load this one phrase of the work. So, for example, if you would quote a verse from the Bible, you wouldn't need to download the entire Bible. You would only download one single verse of the Bible. And now to the tech stack, what makes this possible? And this almost all of the fun properties are thanks to the Hypercore protocol. I think Tosh already talked about Hypercore, and I think mostly about the Hyperswarm aspect, which is the network aspect. So this allows you to communicate with other peers who either want to read the work you have available or who own works that you wish to read. So this is all done by the Hyperswarm network. And then there is one very fun aspect, which is that we can connect through the browser. So this is quite new in the peer-to-peer world, that you can connect from a browser to the decentralized stack. So one side which has been investigated is to use peer-to-peer browsers, so separate browsers like the Agora browser or an old project as well, where I forgot the name. But now you can actually do it through the Firefox or Chrome or whatever, whichever browser you wish to use. And it will connect to a relay which connects you to the swarm. So this is not a very nice solution because it becomes a centralized system. This is centralized, so this has all the weaknesses of a centralized system, as in if you start bombarding it, it will crash. But it's a nice intermediary step. And let's just hope that in the future, Firefox and Chrome will have built-in peer-to-peer primitives, so we don't have to use these kind of hacks. But okay, so that's the network aspect. And
one question. Could you solve the centralized issue by having? I mean, maybe it would not be for every user, but like if I would download some application that runs on localhost, that gives me some sort of bridge. Could that solve the centralized issues, even though it's a little bit more issue than just using the browser without any downloaded extra software?
So if you download extra software, you could just download the Electron app, and then everything is solved for you. If you install software, it's better to connect directly with the swarm, because that's what extra software will allow you to do.
I was thinking that that's true, but like I feel that browsers like Beaker browser or Agrigor or any peer-to-peer browser means that people need to switch browser or use two browsers. And from my experience, most people are very happy with the experience that they get in Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser they chose. And people maybe are not religious about it, but it's like a big ask for them to switch. So even if some extra software in the background could just help them to still keep their browser of choice, maybe that's Google Chrome, that would make the experience a lot better. And I mean, maybe is that part that you run in as a relay, as a let's say a service? Is that downloadable? Could the user run it? Like, is there a download link so that they can have that choice if they don't want to use your centralized gateway?
It's a good question, and to be honest, I'm not really sure. I think it should work. So my answer would be, I think it should work. If you run the relay in localhost, it should be able to relay you to the Hyperswarm network if you are running the Hyperswarm network as well on your own machine. So this would be one way of doing it. So you would need to run both the Hyperswarm network and this relay, and then you could connect from your browser over a localhost relay.
All right, thank you. I mean, it was just one question, but yeah, please continue. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I hadn't thought of this way of solving it. Yeah, but to continue, so the backend is just it's data structure on top of Hypercore, the base data structure, called Hyperpubee, which is a distributed key value store. And on top of this, to have this functionality of embedding, there is a kind of decentralized directed graph of work content. So your root node would be the poem, then its children would be the different verses of the poem, and then each verse would contain several line nodes. If you can also contain line nodes or verse nodes from other works. That's where it becomes decentralized. I won't go into much detail here because I don't know how interesting it is. But if people want to discuss this data structure, I'd be very glad to, because it's something I'm still iterating over. It's really fun actually to think about how to model this. And then the front end is more classic. It's just a Vue plus Quasar application. Is there a question?
I mean, for the front end, I guess everybody has their own stack. Some people like React, some people, I guess, like Vue. I personally prefer vanilla JavaScript, doing just raw CSS, HTML. But and I guess that's not much. There's no difference from how you would build a traditional app. But I think the Hyper-B or the data structure part, that's kind of where things are different. And then you would just use that in a traditional front end. But how that's structured, that will be my favorite part to go deeper into. But if you have some other ideas or...
So we can definitely go deeper into the data structure. I definitely won't go deeper into the front end because, as you say, that's pretty boring. I just wanted to mention it to have it complete. So the first option would be to go a bit deeper into the data structure. The second option would be to go deeper into what can Hyperpubee do, what are possible applications, and what are some other fun things you could build on top of this. I can actually leave it to the audience to choose what they want to hear more about.
I personally think what Hyperpubee can do is maybe more interesting because this is what we cannot find anywhere online. But if we will at the end have enough time, we can of course also go deeper in the data structures. But to share more about your projects and ideas and what can be done on top is definitely the best we can hear, I think, from you directly.
Right, perfect. That's also the part I prepared, so that's a relief. So you can just skip to the possible applications. And the principal one to me is publishing poetry and prose, or collections of poetry and prose. That's the original reason I created it. But because of this embedding functionality, it also can make studying literature a lot easier and even fun. Well, for me it's already fun, but maybe not for everyone. Now, I'll just put here two examples of very important literature of the last century which could benefit a lot from Hyperpubee. The Wasteland is a pretty long poem by T.S. Eliot, one of the masterpieces of modernism, and it is full of references. The references tends maybe even up to 100 other works of literature, often picking parts of them. And then what you get is footnotes and footnotes and footnotes. So it would be much more fun to have this Hyperpubee interface where you can see, okay, this comes from some source, and you can click on it, see, okay, what is the source? And, okay, so that's why he's using it here. Now I understand. I'll give an example to make this more concrete in the next slide. But basically having a much more intuitive way of reading poetry which plays with association. And then Naked Lunges is one of the prose masterpieces of postmodernism from William S. Burroughs. And the history of this is that he wrote pages and pages and pages in a kind of fugue state. And then afterwards, when he got out of the fugue state, he connected them into Naked Lunch. But he often switched things around, and in later publications he even took it much further, and he started cutting his sentences in half and putting them in a different order. So it would be very, very fun to see the original source and how he mixed and matched everything in such an interactive manner. Then another possible application, again with this embedding principle, is that you could have explicit sources in journalism or in scientific papers. For example, if you would do an interview and you have the raw text, the transcription, you could have the edited version, just quoting this raw text. Or if you quote someone from, let's say, a public statement, you could have the context immediately there, so you can't quote people out of context anymore as easily. And then my favorite application is to play with these embeddings. I'll give an example just to give the idea of what it's about. This is more far out. This is the creative writer in me having fun. So this is a little part of a poem I wrote, and the context of this text itself is that I'm critiquing some of Ezra Pound's ideas. He's a poet as well. And then I can connect nothing with nothing is a famous line of The Wasteland of T.S. Eliot. And then to understand what's happening here, well, not to understand, because understanding is not a point, but to get a feel for what's happening here, you could have a look at what is the context of these lines in The Wasteland. Then you would see that it's, I won't explain the context because this would then become a literary class, but there is a very significant context. And also T.S. Eliot is not a pupil, but Ezra Pound kind of helped make him famous. So he's the prodigy of Ezra Pound. And this is the fun bit. That's the part I wanted to show. So again, in The Wasteland, there is a quote, back to Carthage, then I came. And this is actually a quote. So T.S. Eliot quoted the Confessions of St. Augustine, or back to Carthage, then I came. Now here I'm quoting and slightly modifying this quote of T.S. Eliot, so we already have two levels of reference. And I use it to connect it with another major piece of poetry of the previous century, which is Whole by Allen Ginsberg. And this line here is a description of a friend of his, Cardinal Solomon, who was in a mental institution. So this is, again, a completely different context. And what embeddings allow you to do, because you have this explicit context if you want it, is to really play with those contexts in a way which is not possible with paper literature, because you would need a bunch of books in front of you and then footnotes and looking up all the references. So this is really very fun. If you enjoy writing, it can be a lot of fun to start playing around with this. So yeah, this was a more literary intermezzo. Then we'll go back to Hyperpubee as what it is. So there are some limitations, and the biggest one is that you can only embed other Hyperpubees. So if you go back to the previous example, I would first have to enter The Wasteland, all the references it makes, so all the other works it references, I would have to input them all into a Hyperpubee format. So that's pretty annoying. I don't think there's a way around this, because if you don't do this, you don't have this idea of embedding and this idea of versioning. Something else is that formatting is a bit of an issue. So that's a part where I'm also still iterating and trying to figure out how to do it. How it's done now is I define, for example, the concept of verses, chapters, and also the concept of cursive, indented, whatever, in the back end, and then I make sure the front end can make sense of them using CSS or maybe even some JavaScript if it's complex. But that's annoying because if someone wants to do something special with formatting, they would need to create their own front end to render it. So I hope to find a nicer solution there, but I don't know if it's possible. And a completely different kind of issue. I'm not sure if this is completely legal in terms of authorship and rights, etc. So that's something that I will also have to figure out before I start going too wild with this. Because I'm pretty sure embedding parts of text is legal. It's been done throughout history. But I'm not sure what happens if you start showing the full context of this or the full source. So open question. If anyone's a copyright lawyer, feel free to help solve it for me. But it's something to consider when playing with this. Then the current status. So there is a working prototype, as you've seen. But it's still in alpha. So in particular, I'm working on a big update of the data model. So there will be at least one more breaking change, and there might be more before the stable version 1 is released. So it's great for playing around with already, but not for publishing your masterpiece. So I've already went over some of the things I'm still working on, and I hope to have a stable release at the start of next year. And now the fun part, the part where we can dream a little, the possible extensions or where to go with these ideas. So one is that you could create an interface to paper publications, because in the end, to be honest, I much prefer reading a book than reading from a screen. So you could find an export format and then get in touch with people who do it yourself, publishing or printing, have them print your works you published through Hyperpubee. I would also really like to have Hyperpubee for music. So you could first link music with lyrics, and then also you could embed music in, for example, poetry, because music has also, much more so still than text, a lot of association, a lot of feelings attached to the music. If you could explicitly embed this in a text, it would be quite powerful. So this is something I'd really like to figure out how to do this. And then a more practical aspect is that I believe there could be a monetary component as well, which is compatible with Hyperpubee. So one aspect would be that you could accept donations or charge for reading a work. And then the fun aspect is if you use parts of other works, or let's say you have a collection of pieces of prose and poetry, or you have let's say a journal and you have a bunch of articles of different authors, you could give each of them a share automatically whenever money comes in. So I think this could be a very good fit with the Hole Punch platform, which I think will be coming out at the end of the year. So I'll definitely be looking into that as well. And that's it for now, as far as my dreams go, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
This is really amazing. I studied literature, and of course I since then transitioned into coding, so I don't read that much anymore. But it's kind of like very inspiring to have now two of my worlds kind of combining in your project. So it's really lovely. My question is actually, did you first have idea and then you were searching for technical solution and decided to go with Hypercore and this whole Hyper stack? Or were you first looking at the Hyper stack and then thinking like what interesting could you build on top of it?
That's a very cool question. So I already had this idea of publishing in my mind for a long time. And something never really clicked there until I stumbled upon Beaker browser. So that's how I got into the Hypercore stack. So it was first the idea of I want to publish in a way which makes sense. Then I stumbled on Beaker browser and the Hypercore protocol. But then this fun interaction started happening, because once I started understanding Hypercore better, I came up with the idea of the embeddings. Then this led to a new way of writing poetry. So it was an interactive process of discovering possibilities and looking at the tech, is it possible? But it started with the idea of I want to publish in a decentralized manner.
All right. I mean, that's pretty cool to hear and very interesting. I mean, I think almost everyone had that I talked to, like people that do other kinds of projects, they also had some sort of idea first, and they were searching. At some point, stumbled upon maybe the bigger browser or aggregor, or before that there was like a dot explorer, or there's so many, and then learning more about the tech inspired them to do it in even more decentralized ways. So it's interesting. That seems to be like a constant. Right. Otherwise, I mean, I personally would be still interested in learning details about the tech, but I think there's maybe more other questions from the audience first.
Yeah, Jonathan has a question.
I like the demonstration that you did at the beginning. It was very, very simple and very powerful, very quick demonstration of what's possible. Just a note that I keep on mispronouncing your project. I keep on calling it a Hyperpubee, like a little a dog that's literary sources for you.
I like this name as well, so it could be a good rebranding opportunity. The Hyperpubee Go Fetch.
That's a nice one. How much time do we still have? I mean, technically it's also the last talk, so yeah, even if we go over, it also depends on you. But I would be personally interested in the data structure, like the details.
But maybe first, just one more
I
question.
think
Like,
you're muted if you're trying to say something.
Oh no.
okay, Alex says he would be still interested to hear more about the data structure, but I would just have one more question before. Is this just your like hobby project, or are you trying to make it a sustainable thing, or what is happening in this sense?
It is definitely my hobby project. So on the one side, this means that I don't have to worry about ever making money out of it. On the other side, it means I don't have as much time for it. But I do want to make it sustainable, basically because I want to publish my own work through it. But it's not my job working on this. I'm a software engineer to earn my living.
Just a second. Yeah, I see. Cool. I mean, it's really amazing that you can do job and this on the side and writing. So amazing, really. So if you want, you can dig a little bit deeper into these data structures and teach us some more of what you learned building this.
Okay, I'll give it a try, but it might be hard because I didn't prepare any visuals. But, so the base level of abstraction is the Hyper-B. So we build on top of this, and we want to get to a decentralized graph, directed graph. So maybe first, what is a graph? Let's see if I can paint actually. I won't try to paint, it doesn't seem to be working. But so a graph is just a simple mathematical structure where you have the concept of nodes and they can be connected. So in this case, a node would be part of your text. For example, one line of your poem. And another node could be a structure on top of this, for example, a verse. So a verse node would contain 4 line nodes. So it is a graph, but it has direction. So that's the directed part. And
one question: so you're using the Hyperpubee as a key value store underneath, but you're talking about the graph. So I imagine that for every paragraph, every line, maybe letter, I don't know where is the border, but that you address that somehow. Like, how do you map the graph onto the key value store? And how do you also embed links to other work?
Yeah, so each like the verse or each line indeed is an entry in the key value store. And the level of granularity is any piece of continuous text which has the same formatting is one entry. So one line of poetry would be an example, but if the start of your line is cursive and the next part is not, you would have to split it into 2 entries. Or if the start of your line is your own text and the second part is a quotation of another work, these would also be 2 entries. So that's the level of granularity. And the entry is indeed, the key is the unique identifier, for example, line 0, line 1, line 2, etc. And the concept of children would be any node contains a list of children, an ordered list, and each child is identified by first the hash of the Hyperpubee where it lives, and then its location. So then you can look up the Hyperpubee it belongs to, and then you can fetch the key value pair that you reference. So that's how the graph is structured.
So, but you go line by line, not sentence by sentence if it's a text with sentences.
So the concept is for prose, the base unit is paragraph. So it's not sentence based, it's paragraph based, because that's where your layout needs to indicate that it's something else. And for poetry, it's line based. So for poetry, the structure would be plain text, line, verse, and then if it's a long poem, perhaps chapters. And for prose, it would be paragraph, section, chapter, some additional possible structures like introductory text or whatever you would want to imagine.
Sounds cool. Do you need to then manually in the UI select what kind of text you're dealing with, or does it detect that? I don't know.
Yes, I'll show. This is also, I'm still sharing my screen, right? And so this is how you would indicate that it's a poetry. So then what it will do is it will flag this as poetry and parse it as being a poem. So these are lines, this is a verse, this is another verse. The front end will then interpret the fact that these are lines or verses to give it a poetry formatting. If we would indicate that it's prose, that's here, and it will interpret this as being, this is the title, so it will interpret it as a title, and each of these would be a paragraph. So then it will render it in a prose styling. And if we would start including formatting, for example, making this italic or whatever, then it would split this particular line into 3 plain text pieces. This would be rendered with stored with formatting nothing. This would have formatting cursive, and this would have the normal formatting as well. So you do indicate which style classes you want to use. But this is
that's pretty amazing. I love it. I also, maybe you didn't see because maybe I didn't share my screen, but like I tried out and I could load the pros also on my computer on Hyperpubee, so it worked pretty smooth. And we'll definitely read, of course. Also take some time later to read it.
Yeah, do we have anything else? Because otherwise we can slowly wrap it up. Hyperpubee.
Yeah.
Jonathan says Hyperpubee. Woof woof.
Yeah.
Fetch.
I might change the name.
All right then. I mean, thank you for presenting Hyperpubee and also the technical aspects behind it. The idea is pretty cool. Especially like inspired by the trickle down mechanics that you have in mind. Like we also have similar ideas for completely different projects, but they are of course also hypercore based. So I like that. That's like a reoccurring theme. Maybe we can kind of try to synchronize inside a Dot ecosystem to see when projects progress, how we can actually make that happen, and maybe even standardize that it works similar in different kinds of apps that are built in similar ways. I mean, maybe they don't deal with pros, but they deal with something else. And there's always a way to trickle down, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I hope the Hypercore team, the hole punch app they're going to deliver, I hope it will help do this. It's a very fun economic model, I believe.
I also think so. I think that they will release it in December, but as you mentioned already, there is another talk from the socket supply team, which should have been earlier, but somehow we had some technical problems. They might do it maybe later or on another day, somewhere in between now and the 10th. And I think they also now on NodeConf Europe released like an SDK, like a very minimal take on Electron that works on mobile and creates an app like cross-platform for building decentralized or apps. So in a way similar. I'm not sure if they have payment mechanisms built in, but it's somewhat description-wise similar to what Hole Punch is promising. So maybe that's also another option. But yeah, we'll have to see. And I would love to be able in the future to maybe download the relay to run it on local host, so I don't have to use the centralized service, but I can still use it in Chrome, like as an option for those users who kind of want to go in more peer-to-peer. But yeah, it's amazing because I think there's not many projects that offer Hypercore in the browser. I think we have another talk in the next day from the Share team. They have like some sort of peer-to-peer radio, and they also made it work in the browser. But I also think that's not yet open source, but it's built on Hyper, so maybe they can tell us more than two.
Yeah, I'd be super interested to hear how they do the audio, because I will need to do this for the Hyperpubee part, and it seems tricky.
Okay, we'll make sure to ask enough technical questions so that we can see how it works underneath.
Yeah, if you feel you can also join that talk, I think it's probably gonna be tomorrow by Diego from the Share team, but we'll see.
Thank you very, very, very much for this inspiring talk, and keep up the good work. And where can people find you? Just if somebody wants to get in touch, what's the best way to follow your work and yourself?
So either the Hyperpubee website, or you can send an email to this email here. I'll post the slides as well, so anyone can have a look at these links.
Oh, I see. So Hans is your name, because I was always asking myself, what is H standing for? Perfect, because I can't pronounce your surname. So it's like, how do you pronounce your surname? So
in Dutch, it's de Grote.
Okay, de Grote.
That's
okay.
yeah. So that's a good pronunciation. I found it to be quite hard for many people.
Wow, yeah, especially when you just see it, it's like, how do I pronounce this? But now at least I know your name, so fantastic. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Hope our recording worked nicely, so that you also have something that you can then share with your followers.
Yes, thanks a lot for
Thank-
inviting me. It was a lot of fun. And enjoy the
Thank you.
camp. I hope to be there next year.
Everybody says this, so I hope that next year everybody is really coming.
If you have a favorite location, you let us know in advance, then we can see and what the best one would be.
I'm quite flexible, so it's surprise me. And, see.
Super. Okay,
Okay.
have a nice evening and thank you once again.
You too. See you.